Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Inside Data Series podcast. In this episode, we're going to experience a new way of thinking about data management. And there is no one better to do that with than Paul Jones, data management extraordinaire and author of The Data Garden. Paul, great to have you with us on this episode. Do you want to give us a quick intro?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Paul Jones. I'm currently a director in the data analytics and AI practice with Beringer Partners. I've been working in the data management space for coming on to 18 years, initially in consulting, and I spent about 10 years in industry. So I was the global head of data governance for Barclays and set up their first group-wide data governance structures. Then I moved across to Nationwide Building Society, where I was their data protection officer, set up their new second line of defense data protection office function after GDPR. And then I moved in back into the first line and picked up responsibility for their data governance teams. I moved back into consulting in November last year. So I'm now working with various different organizations on data management challenges, primarily in the financial services sector.
Fantastic. Full circle.
It's good to be back. Good to be back.
Great stuff. Awesome. Thank you. So the reason we're here today is obviously to discuss this and that. I can see it behind you as well. Your book, The Data Garden, Other Data Allegories. The book, I've never read a data book that's been written quite in this way. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Never even thought of data management in that way either, to be honest with you. So yeah, that was really cool. Could you, for our listeners, just summarize what the book is and what made you kind of take this sort of unique approach?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's really good to hear. So the Data Garden, it's a set of 6 short fictional stories, and each one is an allegory. So it's a kind of an analogy, a set of metaphors to bring to life a data management topic. So I moved through data governance, metadata, data architecture, and so on and so forth. The idea being that by linking it to something that everyone can understand, the concepts aren't as difficult to follow. And quite often when you think of it in the terms that they're described in the book, why you have to do certain things to achieve other things is kind of common sense, because it's very similar to other things that you recognize in your life. So that was the idea behind it.
Yeah, great stuff. You do say in the introduction that the topic of data management is a bit dry. But obviously you kind of counter that throughout the book with really, relatable and sort of good imagery and kind of thought-provoking links to real life things. How important is it, do you think, in the sort of wider world to make data management as a topic kind of relatable?
So I think it's really important from 2 perspectives. I mean, first of all, as a data professional, I spend a lot of my time delivering change and delivering value through data management, and that generally involves encouraging other people to either do something new or to do something differently. In order for me to be able to get them to do that, I need to help them to understand why it is that they're doing it and how to do it. And especially for non-technical audiences, speaking in technical ways just doesn't work. But I think also just from a personal perspective, just with how prevalent data is in our lives in general, both at work and from a personal standpoint, I just think it's really important for people to understand what data is, how it works, and how to get the best out of it. Because you can just go through life and just allow, I mean, obviously a big thing for us on a personal level is privacy, because every time we use our phone or interact with anything digitally, we are generating data about ourselves. Understanding a bit about that can help you to gain a level of control over what you're doing. But again, from a business standpoint, it's particularly important because businesses run on data. So, having an appreciation for data management can help you be more effective in whatever you're doing in business.
Yeah. Would you still say that data management is still somewhat overlooked as being as important as it probably is? And obviously all the other areas of data, as we know, are much more I don't want to say interesting, I don't want to offend anyone, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, if you talk about data management as not the all-encompassing thing, but the bit which is around capturing and governing and making sure that data is in a good state, I think that I would say that it's quite common for people to be more focused on the exciting stuff you can do with data once you've got it into a good state. So all the analytics and machine learning and all those kinds of things, which are very important. I mean, you know, it makes complete sense because you can deliver a huge amount of value through those kinds of techniques. But if your data's rubbish, doesn't matter what WYSI techniques you use, the outputs aren't going to be as good as they could be. Yes, I think that probably less so now. I think that people are. It's over the years. It's becoming more and more widely recognised that you've got to manage your data effectively to be able to do any of that smart stuff. But yeah, especially with very non-technical business executives who just want the results and they don't want to hear about all the hard stuff you've got to do to be able to get there. It's not uncommon to have those conversations and help people to understand why it's important to invest in that foundation. Because actually, although you might have to slow down to do some of those things, you can then go a lot faster once you've got the foundations in place, and you can do far more advanced things. So it's very worth making that investment.
Yeah, totally. Right, next set of questions. We're going to run through a bit of the book. Don't want to give too much away, so it's up to you how much you divulge. But we'll start with the Data Garden, which is the first short story. Really like this one because it's kind of, you know, got it all really. A few tactical wins in there. Don't forget about the bigger picture, and then it's a bit of a data leader career path through it as well. Yeah, so talk us through the Data Garden.
Yeah, so the Data Garden uses the analogy of plants and trees and things as being data, and so there's kind of two parts of the story really. One is a bit of a description of the nature of data, in that there are various different types of data. And again, I deliberately don't specify what those types are because I want to leave it up to the reader to interpret it based on their own experiences. But you can imagine mapping some of the things in the chapter to reference data and master data and transactional data and structured and unstructured and so on and so forth. You know, depending on the type of data, you do different things to manage it. But as you say, actually, the core of the story is really about someone's journey, and it's written as though you as the reader are that person, starting as a data gardener with a single, very small garden. So that could be you're just working on a single database, and then moving through their career with bigger and bigger gardens up to the point where you're running an estate, and as you go through that, just as in data management, when you're working at small scale, you can do most things manually. You can do it on your own. It can be quite simple. There's no point in investing in anything, you know, smart technology. The bigger you go, the more complex you get. You're going to need to employ people to do certain things. You can't do it all on your own. You're going to have to engage the user base to make sure that they interact with your data and don't corrupt it, and that they use it as effectively as possible. And also, you're going to need to invest in technology, automation, you know, sprinkler systems and ride-on lawnmowers or whatever it happens to be from a garden perspective. But of course, that could be automated lineage tools, automated data quality reporting, you know, all those. There's all kinds of things that you can do from a data management perspective. But I think the other thing for me is the recognition that actually having an appreciation of each of those different levels is important for a data leader, so that you can apply proportionate measures depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve. You know, you can invest in the right things, you can employ the right people, and you know, I think that the most effective data leaders I've worked with have often played roles across all different parts of the life cycle and in varying sizes of teams, so they can be really adaptive to the environment they were working in.
Yeah, brilliant, good stuff. On to the second story now. It kind of mixes politics with data. I mean, when does that ever truly happen? But jokes aside, you make a great point, and it's a great way to kind of picture the implementation of data standards, controls, and a data management framework. but potentially where we start kind of losing the audience, standards, documentation, etc. So how do you genuinely kind of make that side of data sort of interesting for people?
So I think when it comes to actually rolling this stuff out in reality, I try to just avoid any of those terms as far as I can. I mean, people just using the term governance or policies, whatever, just tends to turn people off. I mean, it's just not. It sounds like, oh, rules I've got to follow, that kind of things. But that's really when it comes to the rollout. I mean, for me, this chapter was more. Part of it is just an explanation of the difference between management and governance and what that means. But also, I mean, actually, when you look, if you look at how a country is governed, it's exactly the same in many ways, and you have to make decisions about how much do you centralize and build out service at the center, how much do you federate and allow people to just get on with things, how far do you go in terms of enforcement versus encouragement, where do you spend your money? It's all those kinds of things. But then to your point around how do you make it interesting, it's when, so if you think about the government, if they roll out some new policy, how do they communicate it to us, the population, so that we will engage with it and participate? And, you know, because that's how we can then be effective and productive as human beings in society. And it's the same if you imagine that a person is data instead. You know, it's the same kind of thing. You know, how do you get the best out of the data? How do you make sure that it complies with rules, but in such a way that its quality is maintained, and then it can be used for the right things. So all those analytics and to drive value and to drive operational use case and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the essence there.
Yeah. I guess obviously you mentioned you work in financial services. That's kind of your thing. I guess if we were chatting a couple of years ago, all of the regulatory activity was a bit of a major sort of key driver in data governance. We've heard the horror stories. Do you think regulation really kind of helps drive the right message in terms of data management, or do you think it can be kind of used but, you know, be interpreted the kind of wrong way?
I think that generally speaking, I would say that the intent is often absolutely right in the regulations. Quite often when you boil it down to what it's trying to achieve, it's difficult to argue with it. I mean, it's sensible stuff. The challenge often comes down to interpretation and implementation. So when people either misinterpret it, and quite often that's either taking things too literally, and thinking, well, because these specific words are used, I'm going to translate that into specifically what I do, and misses the point. Like the word, yes, you need to deliver to that thing, but it's in order to achieve something of value or to reduce some risk, not just for the sake of doing it. Or it's taken and you jump to a solution because the solution seems like a good idea, and everyone gets really fixated on delivering this solution. Again, misses the point in terms of, you know, generally speaking, regulations are there to, I mean, quite often it's to mitigate risks, it's to protect people, but also, you know, a lot of the, especially when you look at, I mean, I'm going to mention BCBS 239 for financial services just because it's just like a description of data management best practice, basically. So it literally talks through a lot of the kind of things that you would normally expect to put in place. But again, the whole point of doing it is to deliver better outcomes, to deliver more effective reporting. And when you get fixated on, oh, we've got to do something about completeness, and it all just becomes about creating measures to do this, when actually it's like, well, why is it we're doing this? I think that's the mistake people still unfortunately make, is when you take a regulation and you just turn it into something that you're just implementing for the sake of it, instead of really working out where's the value that I can drive through doing this. Because I can't think of a case actually where there isn't some value that you can get out of doing work to comply with a regulation if you invest in the right way, if you do it in the right way.
Yeah. So really, you don't need to actually talk about the regulation at all. If you set these things up for success from the start in terms of generating business value, you're ticking the regulatory box anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole regulatory thing should be invisible to most people. I mean, there's always going to be a need for someone somewhere to have the mapping, because regulators expect evidence. So you're going to somewhere you're going to have to compile the evidence that demonstrates how you're complying with the regulation, so that you can provide that to the regulator. But the average person in the business shouldn't need to know. I mean, there's a lot of jargon and things that gets rolled out because it's linked to regulation. No one cares. I mean, if it's not gonna actually help, I just hide all of that from people and just do that in the background and really focus on what is it that people need to do, and what do people need to do differently that will enable them to be more effective and comply with the regulation just as a happy side effect of doing the right thing, as opposed to it being because you need to comply with regulation, which
the big fat bat that you smack people with to get things done. Yeah. Okay, great. People are gonna have to buy your book for this one, but to really understand it. But what are data zombies, and how should we deal with them?
So I used data zombies to represent data that you shouldn't have anymore, basically. So it's very old data that you shouldn't. So to give you an example, say you have someone who was a customer 50 years ago, you've done absolutely no business with them for 50 years, and you've still got their data. You shouldn't have their data. There's no good reason. You are almost certainly not complying with certain data privacy regulations, so you shouldn't have it. Having it is not only not complying with laws and regulations, but it represents a risk in terms of you could misuse it. There could be a security risk if it's exposed. Plus, there's a cost. I mean, you're still spending money on keeping that. And I know that a single data item might not be that big a deal, but when you're talking about that on very large scale, it can cause problems. So that's one kind. And the other kind is a similar one, whereby you've got data which you need to keep for legal reasons, because there are laws that say you must keep data for a certain amount of time. But instead of archiving it somewhere where it's safe and looked after, so that you can move it on once you're past that retention period, you just leave it in with everything else, and then it can be misused, and you have a lot of the same kinds of risks associated with it. So just thought it'd be a bit of a fun way of bringing that kind of idea to life. It's amazing how well it works, actually, when you kind of take these analogies and you start stretching, you think actually that kind of works. You can really compare it to how data kind of manifests in reality and how you need to manage it to be more effective.
Yeah. Just don't let it turn into the Walking Dead, basically. Cool. So I know a few people probably, and we won't name names, but quite a few people who could do with visiting the data quality hospital. This one, hit with me pretty hard. It reads pretty much like a data strategy as it is. You could potentially use it as your data strategy, I thought. Triaging issues, combining tactical wins and high priority wins, all while sort of broader strategy is being developed, moving towards a sort of healthy state where prevention is always better than cure. Talk us through the story and the importance of sort of data quality generally.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously data quality is incredibly important for a whole range of reasons, which I could easily talk about for quite a while. Not least, I mean, I guess if we talk about the importance, first of all, if you have poor quality data, it can result in poor outcomes in terms of your processes. So and just to give an example, as each of us as customers, if you've got an app and you interact with a customer via the app and you go in and your data's wrong, suddenly you've got less money in your account than you should have, or you can't use it because your data's wrong. That's a direct impact on customers. It could have an impact on your operational process, how you service customers, but also it can have an impact in terms of decisions that you make. So if you're going to invest in something, or you're going to make some kind of strategic decision and your data's wrong, you could end up losing a lot of money. And so there's lots of reasons for ensuring your data quality is maintained. In terms of the story itself, actually, this analogy is something that is one that I had used many years ago, probably several times actually. That the whole concept of kind of stopping the bleeding and, you know, prevention's better than cure and those kinds of things. And all I did really was build that out into what would that look like if I took it, you know, to the extreme and said, well, what are all those components kind of from entering the hospital? Because again, it really does work in terms of how a hospital works. When you enter the hospital, the first thing is a triage, you know, to work out how much of a priority your case is, so that you can decide, do you need immediate urgent emergency care, or do you go to the priority kind of queue, or can you be sent away to come back later, that kind of thing. But then you've got everything that happens within the hospital in terms of the organization and handling data quality issues as they come in. But also you've got everything outside of the hospital, which is something that's touched on towards the end, which is preventing anyone coming in as patients in the first place. If you can prevent the data quality issues before they even occur, you don't need to triage them and treat them, and you don't have these kind of emergency cases. And that starts getting into preventative controls in the business, which might, you know, that they could be vaccines or whatever it happens to be, but like front end data validation, so that people can't physically capture the wrong data, you know, that kind of thing. But there's also a piece around communication and data literacy. So because there's always room for human error. And that's another thing, you know, how do you push that out, and how do you then monitor that and make sure that you're keeping an eye on that, and can you respond to it? So this chapter covers that end to end through the lens of, if the people coming in were the data and they were the patients, how would you handle that, and what would that process look like effectively?
Yeah. How we live in a very modern world, don't we? How important it is, do you think, for people to try and automate some of these data quality processes?
So I think actually, again, this kind of goes back to the first chapter in terms of depends on the scale of what you're trying to do and how challenging the issues and that kind of thing are. When you get to very large scale, I think it's crucial. It's absolutely crucial. I'd also say that some simple things, like, as I mentioned, front-end validation, should just be a hygiene factor that everyone builds in to their systems nowadays. I mean, there's no excuse not to have that. So building things in which just automatically sort out the kind of really basic things, I think is really important. But yeah, the larger you get, the more important it is to automate data quality monitoring, automate fixes where possible, because there are times when that kind of thing is possible with certain data flows. You know, you can catch things and you can transform them so that so they don't become issues further down the line. But also just having robust processes around identifying the issues, tracking them through to resolution, and those kinds of things are absolutely crucial.
Yeah, cool. So the next story goes on to the sort of modernization of a data estate with data management kind of at its core, bit of a gentrification program for your data. Love the fact we're not, you don't ever allude to kind of the ivory tower architects. What's the most important architectural element, do you think, towards to a data initiative?
So that's a really good question. And again, I'm going to be really annoying and say it depends. It depends on the data initiative. Again, if you're talking about a single database, then the kinds of architectural decisions will be different to if you're talking about a global organization where you're building some kind of reporting layer at the back end. I mean, it can vary. But there are, from an architectural standpoint, there are always very similar things that you think about. And again, when I'm thinking about when I look at an architecture, I'm looking at even a modern architecture. You're looking at, how does the data come in? How is it stored? How is it processed? How does it go out, in really simple terms? And there are a bunch of components you can use across those different parts. And then there are certain types of data. So reference data, where is it mastered, and how do you make sure that all the different other stores and processes and things that need to use it aligned to it. There are kind of architectural patterns you can use for different types of data. What kind of data quality controls do you need to put in place? How do you build your analytics? And then when you get into physical architecture, you start looking at performance and this, that, and the other. So there's a whole load of things to look into. I think that with this chapter, I guess there's two things. One was just a bit of a fun way of thinking about architecture and the importance of architecture. Because I say that, especially when you're looking at scale, it is absolutely worth taking the time to take a step back and make sure you design things properly. Just as if you're building a house or a bridge, you wouldn't just go and start building it. You'd have a think about, you don't build the chimney first, right? Because you're not going to be able to get it up onto the roof. So there's that. But I think the other thing for me in this was, really, it's a story about people, and it's about the mix of skill sets that you need to be able to deliver a project effectively. I deliberately caricatured them. So you've got, as you mentioned, the kind of ivory tower architects, and you've got people who are delivery people who don't care about how it's done. They just want to get it done, and so on and so forth. The reality is you need a mix. You need all of those characters to be effective, and you need to work out how to coordinate people. And again, the bigger the program, the more important that gets, the more of those people you need, and the more important it is to coordinate them effectively and get the most out of that diverse mix of different views and skill sets and things. And hopefully I managed to turn that into a bit of an entertaining kind of an entertaining way of looking at it, but where there's genuine lessons as you go through about how to make this kind of thing work.
Yeah, so some of the dialogue, I don't know if it actually happened in real life, Paul, or not. You don't need to say, but no, it is good. It is good. Obviously, in larger programs, you've got multiple people all coordinating different things. Where can that muddy the water? Can things go wrong because there's not a single point of coordination?
Yes. Yes. I mean, there are different ways that you can run programs, and different structures can be effective, radically different structures. But I would say that the number one reason that programs don't work is because of the coordination. It's because of how people are working together, whether it be through the design of the structure, or just through the people, because you can have a really well-designed program, and if you've got the wrong people on it, doesn't matter how well designed the program structure is, it's not going to work. And likewise, you can have a badly designed program structure, you've got amazing people on it, they'll find a way to make it work at the end of the day. But again, it is down to getting the right people together and working out how they can interact and deliver effectively together is always the key. Yeah.
I mean, not everywhere has a CDO. Very common now for financial services organizations to have a CDO. Is that part of the CDO's role, would you say?
I think that, again, it depends on how the chief data office is set up and the remit of the chief data officer. The thing is that the term CDO can mean very, very different things in different organizations. So, if you've got a small organization that's focused on delivering, I don't know, data products, the CDO is probably running a tech team, and they're like a small, they don't need to worry about large scale delivery. Quite often in large financial services organizations, there's a big focus on governance and policies and standards and regulatory compliance and delivering at very large scale. And when you're doing that, yes, it's really important. But again, there's the other thing is, how big's the CDO function? Yeah. Some organizations centralize a lot of things. You end up with these massive organizations at the center that do all the work. Some have a tiny CDO at the center, and the chief data officer is delivering through influence. Both sets of skills are quite different, and you can achieve the outcomes both ways. But you've got to choose the right person with the right skill sets for the organization, and kind of the way in which the organization operates. Because I've seen, and I've directly seen really talented, really experienced CDOs, heads of data, fail just because they're in the wrong type of organization, the wrong role for them.
Yeah.
Put them in the right role, they will fly. And again, it's having that appreciation of how do you need to execute? What's the culture of the organization? What's the structure? And therefore, what type of person do you need to be able to deliver effectively is a really important part of designing the CDO function and getting, putting the right person in place to lead that kind of capability.
Yeah. Good, nice. So again, another going to take some words out of the book. So if people truly want to understand what I'm talking about, they'll have to go and get it. I don't know, and I probably wouldn't care what's in the data warehouse or in the data product staging area. I probably only care what's down the data high street. So why is metadata management so crucial?
So first of all, I think that's a really good observation, in that generally speaking, as a consumer of data, you don't care about what happened before, you just care about what you get at the end. Just as consumers of anything, you just care about what you get, when you're actually in the shop and you've got the thing on the shelf. That's the thing you care about. Is it the thing that I want? Is it of the quality that I expect? Is it the right price, etc., etc.? That's what you care about. But in order to get it there in the first place, there's a whole load of logistics from wherever it's created to the point where the consumer can get it. And it is the same with data, again, especially when you're doing something at scale, where a data item, or say it's a metric, may have started as a collection of data items 50 systems ago. And then it's moved through various transformations and merged things together, and there's calculations and all kinds of things to end up where it is at the end. And metadata is basically all of the tags that explain what that thing is and where it is. So again, if we talk about a book, the title is metadata, but as a physical item, where is it in the warehouse? That is metadata about the book. So if you don't have that, you can't find it. So none of the technology you put around getting the book and then delivering it somewhere would work. You'd have to then send someone in to physically go and find it. And again, that kind of thing happens. If you don't have metadata and you're trying to find something in your data warehouse, you might not be able to find it. You can run searches, and you might have to get someone who understands the data model to say, well, it's actually, it's that table over there, which is, prod underscore XYZ. What you really want is you want the descriptions and the information about where things are to be readily available so that they can be used. And you can also then use it. You can use it to automate things. You can use it to track whether things are working properly or not. There's a whole load of, because metadata is actually a very broad topic. You've got different types of metadata and so on and so forth. But even the most simple things, like, do you have a description for what this field is so that it's populated properly and then used properly? So fundamental, and yet so often not handled as well as it could do. So it's, to me, metadata is one of those absolutely crucial capabilities from a data management perspective. Yeah.
Cool. So, it's probably sort of underpins a little bit about what we'll talk about now, but the last story in the book's all about data literacy. You link it to a driving school. You even take a learner driver on that dangerous data highway from the previous story, which is nice. Obviously, data literacy is a huge topic for data leaders at the moment. Why is it so important, and what bearing does it have on the success of actually implementing data projects?
So it is fundamentally important. I think, again, using this chapter as an example, probably the best way to think about it is from the perspective of someone who's using data as a starting point, because a lot of this, the main character in this chapter is someone who has been using data really ineffectively, and it's caused problems. Or in his case, it's caused car crash. His or her case, by the way, it's written from. So again, I've deliberately written all of these things so that you, as the reader, are the person. You can kind of put yourself in the shoes of the character. So I think that for each of us as individuals, just having a slightly better understanding of how to access data, how to interpret data, how to use it properly, is a really valuable thing to do. It can mean that you can get more value from it. You can be more effective. It can help you in your decision making. It can protect you because it can make it less likely that you make mistakes with it. And again, if you are involved in any actual data management activity in terms of trying to drive changes, you need to understand why you're doing it and how you're going to do it. Because otherwise you're going to make mistakes in simple terms, especially if you, again, going back to the architecture piece, it's very easy to make things a lot worse if you do things in the wrong way. So having a bit of an understanding about the right way to do things can save you a huge amount of time, effort, and money, in sometimes even in the short term, never mind the long term. So to me, it's a hugely important thing. I think the only thing is that the only trouble with data literacy is it's one of these kind of umbrella terms where it can be a bit nebulous. People, again, it's very easy to spend a lot of money on something like this, and a lot of time and effort on it, and it not actually have any real measurable impact, because you're telling people about it, you're training people, you communicate. It's like, so what? And the important thing is to link all of these things to some kind of business outcome or some kind of benefit. So, for example, if you are delivering a new data platform and you're going to derive benefit from a certain set of users using it in a particular way, focus your efforts on those users and on moving the needle on whatever those outcomes are. Don't just try and communicate to everyone just because you think it's a good idea for everyone to know a bit more about data literacy. For example, what kind of decisions do you need to make as an organization? Okay, well, who needs to make those kinds of decisions? Focus on them and bring them up to speed on the things that actually really matter, and so that you can see a return on the investment you make, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you kind of got to have that knock on and continual. Can't just announce something, stick a flyer out. People aren't gonna join the party. You've got to follow it up. No, I get that completely. Brilliant. So on to our final question of the day, Paul. What would be your number one tip for avoiding overgrown data gardens, the data living dead, data quality diseases, the shiny but perilous centralized data warehouse, and of course, a data car crash?
Well, I'd obviously start by going and buying this book, because it will give you all the answers. I think, I mean, I would definitely go back to, I think there's something around just taking the time to understand the importance of data and making sure that even if it's just a case of just making sure that you do everything you can to keep it as accurate as possible. Even if you just do that, it means that everything that is then done with it will be more effective and safer. So I would say, and that could be just as simple as, if you spot things that are problems, flagging it so that something can be done about it, or correct it if you can. I think that would be my key message. It is absolutely worth investing the time in doing that, because the value that you can gain off the back of high quality data is transformational if you get it right. In fact, it's when you see it working, it's staggering, the level of value that you can drive from it. But it does take some upfront investment, and sometimes that can be difficult and painful until you get to that tipping point. It's like, wow, absolutely worth spending that, making those investments.
Yeah. So an investment financially and obviously of time, I guess, whichever one you can afford. Afford first, I guess. Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time, Paul. Been great to have you on. Do you want to let everyone know where they can go and get the book?
On any Amazon store, you can get the book. It's available in both Kindle and paperback editions. So please do check it out.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Paul. Thanks everyone for listening. And looking forward to next time.